Good evening here in the Middle East. Good afternoon in New York. On the lineup tonight, a story drawing outrage and gaining steam in the UK. Over 127,000 British citizens have now signed a petition calling on Downing Street to cut foreign aid spending. Behind it are revelations claiming that some of that aid, UK taxpayer money, is going to terrorism. We'll hear from the man behind the investigation and one of the victims of terror affected by it. First, Danny Swibel has the story.
They were crimes that sent shockwaves throughout the world. Now, London's Mail on Sunday has revealed the perpetrators have been unwittingly funded by UK taxpayer money. Amjad and Hakim Awad, responsible for the brutal murder of parents Ehud and Ruth Fogel and 3 of their children in their West Bank home in 2011. Abdullah Barghouti, a leading commander-in-chief bomb maker in Hamas's armed wing, currently receiving an estimated £106,000 of British aid money, while serving 67 life sentences in prison for the deaths of 66 Israelis in a series of terror attacks. According to the Mail, several thousand Palestinian terrorists are among those benefiting from cash handouts taken from £72 million of aid money allocated to the Palestinian Authority. The British public is outraged by these findings, with almost 120,000 people signing a petition requiring a response from the government and a consideration by the parliament to put the issue of the government's required spending of 0.7% of foreign aid, or £12 billion, up for debate. The total amount is set to rise to £16 billion by 2020.
And the British government responded to i24News with this statement. This allegation is simply incorrect. They write, no UK aid is used for payments to Palestinian prisoners or their families. Only named civil servants from a pre-approved EU list are eligible, and the vetting process ensures our funds don't benefit terrorist groups. They go on to write, EU financial assistance is linked to the same vetting process. Our funds are also subject to independent auditing. And the statement does go on to say the fund is administered via the World Bank and is meant to maintain stability in the Palestinian Authority. We've also reached out to the Palestinian Authority itself for comment, but have not yet received a response. Joining us now from London, contributing editor to the Mail on Sunday and the man who led the investigation on this, Ian Birrell. Ian, good evening.
Good evening.
So I want to just ask you first, in your reporting, how did you end up establishing these links between taxpayer money ending up in the hands of terrorists, allegedly?
Well, there have been issues before raised in places like Holland and in the European Union over payments to prisoners. And under the Palestinian system, anyone convicted for what they see as resisting the occupation gets payments under a scheme whereby the longer sentence you serve, the more money you get. Now, of course, some of those people are some of the worst killers around. Others are doing quite mild acts of resistance, but they do include some suicide bomb people behind that. They include some of the people who have committed the worst terrorist atrocities. Now, 2 years ago, it was said that the PLO was going to take over the payments to prisoners, which incidentally the Palestinian Authority don't deny. They say very clearly that it's not a crime in their eyes to be fighting occupation, and they see these people as heroes who deserve these sums of money. And I should add, they're quite considerable sums. In one case, one guy who's got serving 67 life sentences is estimated to have got more than £100,000.
So in terms of vetting, in the UK response to us on this story, they do mention a vetting process. Did you find that that process exists but is just not working?
No, I think it's more complicated than that. Certainly they are paying salaries of civil servants who, it should be added, haven't worked for 9 years because of the Hamas-Fatah divisions. So Britain is actually paying people not to work. Thousands of them, many of whom have got second jobs, which is a pretty ridiculous use of aid in the first place. But equally, there's this core issue of fungibility within aid, whereby if you pay money to a state which isn't perhaps the most responsible state, it allows other things such as more money to go on corruption or conflict. And clearly, if Britain is paying for salaries for a government which is fairly cash-strapped, that allows money to go elsewhere. But it goes beyond that, because also I spoke to people who, families of people convicted of shooting at Israelis, who said they were getting money from the Palestinian Authority and from the PLO, where there's also clear evidence from the Palestinian Authority itself, from its own documentation that they still fund this money, which was supposed to have been stopped. So the British government hasn't even done the basic checks to see whether the Palestinian Authority or the PLO is still funding these prisoners.
Ian, from your investigation, how long does it seem that this has been going on?
Oh, it's been going on for years. It's been going on a very long time. The Palestinian Authority are quite open about it, and I spoke to lots of people who are receiving these payments. There's no doubt about the payments. There's the issue as to how competent the West is in ensuring that their money doesn't go to these people, and the whole issue of the fact that if you put money into an organization which is spending money in other ways, that allows it, if you're funding their public services, that allows it to spend money in other ways, which is what's happening here. But also, of course, we fund things like schools and education, which are having sports events named after people convicted of terrorism. We fund the Olympic Authority, despite the fact that the chairman has hailed people involved in recent acts of terrorism as heroic figures. It goes much beyond that. It's quite, and I think this is why it's causing such outrage in Britain at a time when there is an issue with jihadi terrorism in Europe.
Ian Birrell of the Mail on Sunday, thanks very much for your time this evening. And we continue with this story. On December 18th, my guest, Kay Wilson, was stabbed in an attack in Jerusalem that also left her friend, Christine Lucan, dead. Out of this investigation, she also knows her attackers are being unwittingly funded, allegedly by UK taxpayers. Kay, good evening. Thanks very much for joining us.
Privilege.
Before anything else, before the investigation, tell me about your story, what happened to you in mid-December.
First of all, I want to thank the Daily Mail for this very, very important article. As a British-born Israeli tour guide, I was taking my American Christian friend for a hike on a Shabbat, a Sabbath. And there, in the middle of the day, we were pounced on by 2 Palestinian terrorists. We were held at knife point, machetes, not penknives, knife point for half an hour. And in the beginning, I'm pretending I'm a tourist, I'm pretending I'm a Christian, and then they find my Israeli ID and my Star of David. And the game's up, and after half an hour, they tie us with my shoelaces, they tie my hands behind my back, gag us with Christine's fleece. And they put me on my knees, and I hear the Islamic creed of faith, and my Christian friends scream Jesus. I say Shema Israel, and they start butchering. And the only chance I realized that I had was to sustain the pain, not move, and play dead. And I watched an innocent human being chopped up like a cucumber before my eyes. They leave, they come back again, they stab me near the heart. They leave again, they believe I'm dead, and I just had one last goal in life, and that was to die nearer where I parked the car. So somehow I managed to stand, and gag bound barefoot. I had 6 ribs that had snapped and were poking out of my back, 30 compound fractures in my rib cage, and bones had splintered off into my lungs and diaphragm, a crushed sternum, a broken shoulder blade, a dislocated shoulder, gag-bound barefoot. I walked uphill for over a mile. And they were caught because in the middle of the attack I managed to nick one with my penknife, so the DNA led to their capture, and they confessed proudly to murdering another Israeli woman, Netta Blatsorek, earlier. And the only thing I will add here too is I faced my attackers in court. I mean, not many people get to live that. And
that's exactly my next question. Tell me about facing them.
Okay. First of all, the most important thing to say, and I object to this phrase resistance from the Palestinian Authority, you know, or frustration. I mean, my gosh, I've been frustrated, but I haven't gone stabbing innocent people or tying them up or hacking them to death, okay? Christine Lucan, an American Christian, was murdered for one reason. They assumed that she was Jewish. All right? Now, when I was in court with them, you know, Israel court is a very small court, I listened to them snigger and I watched them yawn. And I asked myself, how can 2 men who were once little boys grow up and hold a machete in one hand, a Marlboro in the other, and hack at innocent women without blinking an eye? And I'll tell you the answer, it's rhetorical, and I'll take over the show. It's incitement, and it's just as Ian had said, excuse me, it's in every fabric of Palestinian society. It's in their educational, their curriculums, their summer camps, their music, even in their crossword puzzles. They are taught that Jewish people are pigs and monkeys and unworthy of life.
Did you get a chance to speak to your attackers yourself?
No, the only thing I said, I mean, there wasn't, it was like speaking to dead people in a way. I had nothing to say to them.
Did you want to speak to them?
Yeah, but I can't repeat what I wanted to say on live television at the time. But
I
the only thing I did say was in Hebrew at the end, I said, Am Yisrael Chai. And I think that's always the best response to terror.
People of Israel live.
Right, and I would like, obviously, to talk with anybody in the British press and get my story out.
You've been aware of these allegations for some time, also before this investigation. What are you aware of in terms of the actual money going to your attackers or others, for that matter?
I don't know the final sums. I have documents at home, but I've been guiding all day. But basically, I think Ian said, depending how many people they've actually murdered or how long they sit in jail, their execution stipend is enlarged. So we're talking about a lot of money, because the terrorist who murdered Christine Lucan also murdered Netta Blatsorek. So,
right. Kay Wilson, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for letting me get my story out.
And we want to continue with this now with our contributor in London, Jonathan Sashadati. Jonathan, good evening.
Good evening. Good to be with you.
So give us a bit of the numbers now. We're talking about the latest, the reaction, first of all, in the UK. We've seen the numbers of over 127,000 on the petition. Is this making real waves beyond the petition?
Well, having just checked those numbers, they're now up to 128,536. Now, the requirement of these petitions, which are run on the Parliament website, is that you need 100,000 in order to have Parliament consider a debate. They're very likely to debate it if you get over that 100,000. Recently, another similar petition made the news when somebody put one up asking for Donald Trump to be barred from the UK, and duly they went through that debate. Now, that's a good example because it shows that effectively they don't necessarily have any concrete effect or difference in regards to policy. But on this, if you look at the map of where people have been signing the petition as well, which is another function of the site, you can see that actually people from constituencies all over England, and quite a few within Wales and Scotland, have been signing in a pretty even spread, which means that this is not necessarily an issue that's of interest only to areas with some sort of vested interest in Israel, let's say, where there might be high concentrations of Jewish population. And that's partly because the Mail on Sunday didn't just look at the funding of terrorists through the Palestinian Authority, but also at what they say were other wastes of UK aid money, including flying people from North Korea to the UK to help them with their English, or flying singing teachers around the world to teach people British folk songs.
Jonathan, let's speak practically also for a moment. How soon, if at all, could we see a Parliament vote, and what can we expect from a vote like that? What kind of change can we expect?
Well, that vote could, rather than a vote, that debate could come soon in Parliament. But of course, there are 6 other petitions on the website. There's a sort of queuing system which have reached their 100,000 before it. So there is some leeway to rearrange the order, of course, depending on how much they think this is a pressing issue. But this is not the only issue that's being petitioned about on the website. There are petitions all the time for this. But it is one that gathered a lot of support. In just 12 hours, it went over its 100,000 mark.
Right. Jonathan Sashadati, thanks very much for this from London. We'll, of course, continue to follow this story. Thanks very much. We're moving on now. The Egyptian government, led by Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, has taken a hard line on Hamas in Gaza.